Sylvester Stallone walked into that courthouse like any quiet observer. No press, no entourage, just a notebook. He was scouting for a story, the kind you shape into a script and sell to a studio. But what he found was something else entirely. Sylvester Stallone didn't plan to become part of a reckoning. But one courtroom, one woman, and one buried truth changed everything. The morning sun rose low and golden over Charleston, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps like quiet warnings. The old stone columns stood cold and dignified, as they had for a century, unmoved by time or people. Michelle Hemsworth stepped out of her car, navy blue sedan, unmarked, and adjusted the sleeves of her charcoal blazer. Her shoes, modest leather with a slight heel, echoed lightly against the concrete as she walked. She did not wear her robe. She never did outside the courtroom. That, she believed, belonged to the bench, not the street. Her pace was steady, each step careful but certain, like someone who understood the weight of being underestimated and had learned long ago to carry it without breaking stride. Her silver-streaked hair was pinned up neatly, her face composed, eyes observant but calm. She greeted no one, not because she was aloof, but because she knew better than to assume recognition. Inside, the courthouse buzzed quietly. Fluorescent lights, coffee breath, paper shuffling. A federal building at 8:12 a.m. Routine, regulated, ready for another day of procedure. Until it wasn't. At the main security checkpoint, the rhythm broke. Jackson Ryder stood with arms crossed at the metal detectors. Mid-40s, broad, square jaw, regulation haircut. The kind of man who found comfort in control. He saw her walking up and narrowed his eyes, not in recognition, but in assumption. "Ma'am," he said, flat and firm, raising a gloved hand. "Gonna need you to step aside." Michelle stopped, but only briefly. "Is there a problem, officer?" "No visible ID, no clearance badge. You can't just stroll in here looking like that." He didn't say "like that" with specifics. He didn't need to. Michelle reached into her jacket and presented her federal credentials. The badge caught the overhead light, clear, unmistakable. Ryder didn't study it. He barely glanced. Then, without a word, he took it from her hand and slipped it into his pocket. "I'll need that back," she said. "You'll get it," he muttered. "After protocol." He turned and gestured to another officer, then to the hallway. "Let's go." She didn't move at first. Her gaze held his, calm, measured. He didn't like that. "You in a rush to get somewhere, sweetheart?" The word landed heavy. One of the younger guards, a woman, flinched but said nothing. Michelle breathed in slowly. "I'm expected in courtroom 3. "Then let's get this done," Ryder barked. "Random screening, private room." She didn't resist when they guided her through a side corridor, but she didn't comply either. She walked, head high, like a woman who had nothing to hide but knew they weren't looking for hidden items. They were looking for reminders, for hierarchy. The hallway curved into a quiet annex. The room they entered was small, sterile, its single chair cold and metallic. The door remained ajar. Not wide, just enough. Michelle was told to sit. She didn't. Ryder stepped in close. "This can be easy or difficult, up to you." Another guard moved to her left, then her right. Her arms were not grabbed, but they hovered close, like they'd done it before. And still, Michelle didn't speak. Then came the words. The ones that snapped something deep inside. "We need to check the hair. Could be hiding contraband in that mop." The clippers were already in Ryder's hand. The door clicked shut. Outside, in the waiting area near the checkpoint, Sylvester Stallone sat with his assistant. He was there under a different name, unannounced, researching for a legal thriller in development. A former cop turned whistleblower. Fiction. Until this morning, he saw the woman, composed, dignified, being pulled toward the side hallway. Saw the officer who gripped her arm. Heard the condescension, the disdain. "Can't just walk in here like you own the place," Ryder had said. And then, louder, with venom. You want in here. You play by my rules, sweetheart. Stallone's phone was already in hand. He pressed record without thinking. What he captured was not the assault, not the clippers, but the look on Michelle's face, the silent fury in her eyes as she disappeared down the corridor, the moment before the door closed, the moment everything shifted, and that was enough. Enough to show the world something was wrong, enough to start a fire. The hallway behind her was still echoing with silence as Michelle stepped into the light of the courtroom. Her scalp stung in the places where the clippers had torn through more than just hair. The uneven strands clung to her temples like ghosts refusing to leave, but she didn't raise a scarf. She didn't try to hide. The wounds weren't shame, they were proof. She walked forward with quiet precision, heels clicking against polished marble, posture erect, shoulders square. She moved like a woman who had already been broken and had chosen not to stay that way. The courtroom murmurs began to die before she even reached the doors. As they swung open, the space changed. People turned. They looked. Some squinted, unsure of what they were seeing. The woman who'd been escorted through the hallway like a criminal was now walking toward the judge's bench. No robe, no announcement, just the undeniable weight of her presence. At the front, bailiffs froze. Lawyers stilled mid-sentence. A paper slipped from someone's hands and fluttered to the floor with a sound that felt too loud. And standing at the far corner, arms folded, face suddenly pale, was Deputy Ryder, the very man who, not 30 minutes earlier, had gripped her wrist like it didn't belong to a human being and pressed the clippers to her scalp without a word of remorse. His eyes locked on her now, and for the first time, he saw not a target, not a body, not a nuisance, but a reckoning. Michelle climbed the steps to the bench without looking at him. Her robe lay draped over the chair, just as it always did, folded by the clerk out of habit, expectation, maybe even care. She picked it up, and slowly, without assistance, without ceremony, slipped it over her shoulders. The fabric settled on her like a final truth. Then, she sat. The room seemed to exhale. When she spoke, her voice was not loud, but it cut through the tension like glass. We begin this morning with testimony regarding case number 11847A. The matter concerns allegations of excessive force during a protest demonstration held on March 5th. She paused, then added, her tone colder than before. Actions taken by officers of the 3rd Precinct, including violations of constitutional rights and unauthorized use of crowd control measures. It was all too poetic. Too bitter. The woman who had just been violated by an officer in the very building was now presiding over a case where officers had violated others under the same roof of power. No one said it aloud, but the irony clung to the air like the scent of smoke after a fire. Across the room, Ryder hadn't moved. His jaw was clenched, his eyes twitching, as if waiting for her gaze to meet his. But she never looked his way, not once. She focused only on the docket, on the court clerk, on the voices that were meant to be heard. First witness, she said, and the hearing began. Behind the thick walls, just past the main corridor where spectators weren't allowed, Sylvester Stallone leaned against the paneling of the anteroom, arms crossed. He said nothing for a long time. The weight of what he'd seen still sat on his chest like a stone. His assistant, Scarlett, hovered beside him, clutching the small tablet in her hands. "She's the judge," Scarlett whispered. "The one they—" "I know," Stallone interrupted quietly. He didn't blink. He didn't even shift his weight. His eyes were still locked on the screen where the playback had frozen, frame by frame. The moment Michelle was dragged from line, the rough hand on her arm, the badge ignored, the smirk on Ryder's face. "This wasn't part of any script," Scarlett said softly. "No," Stallone replied, voice low. "This is bigger than script." There was no plan yet, no pitch, no studio name or title card. But he knew one thing in his gut the way only a man who's lived too long in Hollywood's shadows can know. This wasn't a story he could walk away from. This woman had just risen from humiliation, from silence, and claimed the seat meant to crush her. That kind of power, the raw, unpolished, painful kind, didn't belong to fiction. It belonged to the world. And maybe, if told right, it could change it. "Save the footage," he said finally. "Back it up 3 times, lock it down. Don't show it to anyone yet." Scarlett nodded. Understood. They stood in silence for another minute. The morning had stretched itself thin by the time Judge Michelle tapped her pen once, twice, then folded her hands before her. Her gaze, steady and stripped of pretense, settled on the man who had haunted the halls of this courthouse for over a decade. The name Deputy Ryder had once commanded quiet obedience. Now it felt heavier in the air, like a rusted weight left too long untouched. "Deputy Ryder," she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a winter gust. "Step forward." The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Papers rustled nervously. But no one spoke. The man who rose from his post near the side door had the posture of someone who no longer believed in his own authority. His uniform, once pressed and proud, looked like it had lost its purpose. Ryder walked with slow steps to the center of the room. For the first time in years, he stood where others had once been made to tremble under his gaze. Now, he couldn't meet hers. Michelle leaned forward slightly. "How many formal complaints have been filed against you, Deputy?" He cleared his throat. "I don't recall." 12, she said, without pause. 12 formal complaints, each buried, each dismissed. How many informal reports, Deputy Ryder? He shifted his weight. "I couldn't say." "You don't need to," she replied. "Because I can." From the gallery, a hush fell like fog. Some leaned forward, some sat back, but all watched with a quiet kind of reverence. There was something sacred about this moment, one person finally speaking where silence had ruled. "You touched women," Michelle continued. "You insulted them. You stripped them of dignity with the same hands you used to flash your badge, and all the while, you hid behind the comfort of knowing no one would call your name." Ryder opened his mouth to speak, but she raised a hand. "You didn't even ask mine," she said. And just like that, it hit them. The courtroom stilled. No murmur, no cough, no shuffling paper to fill the quiet. He had touched her, shaved her, mocked her, all without knowing who she was. The woman before him now, stern, unwavering, in her judge's robe, was the very same woman he had treated like less than nothing. Michelle stood. Her voice did not rise. It didn't need to. "You are hereby placed under arrest, Deputy Ryder, effective immediately. Charges of assault, misconduct, abuse of power. Officers, remove him from my courtroom." There was no commotion, only the click of cuffs and the heavy breath of a man who had built his power on silence and was now crumbling beneath its reversal. As Ryder was led away, Stallone, seated quietly near the back, lowered his head slightly. His hands were calm, his phone held low. No one saw him lift it. No one noticed when his thumb tapped upload. No tags, no filters, just a simple caption. They didn't know who she was, but she knew exactly what she was. The video showed just enough. Ryder's hesitation, Michelle's calm command, the moment truth passed judgment. It took 7 minutes before the clip began to spread, 20 before journalists started whispering, an hour before the networks called. By the end of the day, Judge Michelle trended in 3 languages, and outside the courthouse, quiet turned into gathering. People came, some in silence, some in protest, some in prayer. But all came for her, not because she wore a robe, but because she had worn her shame publicly and turned it into something that shook walls. The Department of Justice issued a statement by dusk. An investigation was officially underway. Internal oversight teams dispatched. The courthouse would not return to business as usual. Inside her chambers, Michelle stood by the window, arms folded, watching as the crowd swelled slowly into the street. Signs began to rise. Stand with her. Power with purpose. The judge who wouldn't bow. She said nothing, Not to the clerk, not to the press, not even to herself. She didn't need to. Her silence now was not weakness. It was gravity. The air in the chamber lounge was still. It wasn't silence in the peaceful sense, but the kind that settled in places where justice had been bruised, where truth lingered just outside the door, waiting to be let in. Michelle sat alone at a small table in the corner, her robe draped over the chair beside her, the sleeves folded like weary arms. Her head, still marked with the uneven growth of hair torn from her just days ago, carried the quiet dignity of someone who had chosen not to hide. She didn't need to. A soft knock broke the stillness. She turned. It was her clerk, eyes cautious, voice lower than usual. "There's someone asking to see you, Your Honor. He says it's important. Sylvester Stallone." Michelle blinked once, slowly, and nodded. "Let him in." The door opened, and in stepped a man both familiar and strange in this setting, grayer than his posters, slower in his step, but with a presence that still filled the room. Not the movie star, not the myth, just a man who had seen too much, who had played heroes for decades, and now found himself face to face with a real one. He removed his cap. "Judge Michelle, I hope I'm not intruding." "You already are," she said, not unkindly. Her voice carried that same even weight it always did, neither sharp nor soft, just final. He offered a faint smile, the kind that knew when not to push. "I'll be brief. I was here when it happened. I didn't know who you were at the time, but I saw what they did. I recorded some of it." Her gaze didn't waver. "That footage, it's the one circulating now?" He nodded. "Yes, my team posted it. I won't pretend we didn't realize it would blow up. But I didn't do it for the views. I did it because no one was saying anything, and I couldn't stomach walking out of that building with my mouth shut." Michelle leaned back slightly, folding her hands. "So why are you here now?" He took a breath. "Because I want to make a film about it. About you, about all of it. But I won't do it without your permission." A long silence stretched between them, not tense, but deliberate. She studied him, not the actor, but the man behind the eyes. A man who had been cast as a fighter so many times he had started believing the costume. But now, here he was, without script or lights, seeking permission from someone who didn't need his fame to be heard. "No," she said at last. He flinched, not visibly, but in the way his shoulders tensed, as if bracing against a blow. "I don't need a movie," she continued. "I need a system that doesn't chew people up and spit them out. I need justice that doesn't depend on how loud the cameras are rolling." "I understand," he said softly. "Believe me, I do. But sometimes the truth needs a different kind of microphone. What happened to you?" "Oh, it was the match. But the fire? That's what people need to see. The whole fire." She looked down at her hands for a moment, at the way her skin had started cracking from courtroom chalk dust and cheap sanitizer. Then back at him. "You're not wrong," she said. "But if you do this, if you tell this story, it can't just be about me sitting in that chair. You have to show all of it. The silence in the hallways, the clerks who looked away, the ones who knew and did nothing, the fear that kept people quiet for years." "I will," he said. "And you'll show what it costs to sit here," she said, tapping the arm of her chair. "Not just to me, but to everyone before me who tried and didn't make it." "I will," he said again, this time stronger. She stood. "Then you can tell it." And just like that, something passed between them. Not an agreement in words, but in weight. From that day on, Stallone became more than a witness. He became a chronicler. His team moved quietly through the courthouse, interviewing those who had never been asked how they felt. Clerks, janitors, former interns. One woman from records broke down in tears after just 2 questions. She'd carried a story for 12 years, and no one had ever asked for it. With every name, every voice, the layers peeled back, patterns emerged, reports suppressed. Memos misplaced. A network of silence engineered not from malice but from habit. The kind of corruption that didn't wear a villain's face, it wore a tie and used words like protocol. And all the while, Michelle kept presiding, stone-faced and still, while beneath the surface the tide was shifting. What began as one video, one quiet moment of resistance, had become a reckoning with roots deeper than anyone had imagined. And the camera wasn't just rolling. Now it was listening. The envelope was unmarked, sealed in dull manila, and left without a name on Michelle's desk just past 7:30 in the morning. It lay quietly between her case briefings and a mug of cooling coffee, as if it belonged there, as if it hadn't just been slipped in by trembling hands desperate for the truth to land somewhere it could breathe. She opened it slowly, fingertips brushing each corner with care, like unwrapping something sacred or dangerous. Inside were documents, copied, redacted, marked in places with circles, arrows, and yellow highlighter that bled through the thin paper like sweat. What caught her attention first wasn't the content, but the signature. It was familiar. Too familiar. Judge Terence Benedict. His name scrawled in that confident, hurried script at the bottom of each page. Date after date, case after case, dismissal after dismissal. Michelle's hand paused over one file. Complainant, Denise Talley. Accused, Deputy Ryder. Recommendation, unsubstantiated, no further action. Signed, Benedict. She stared at the signature for a long time. It had been Benedict who mentored her through her early years on the bench. He was the one who once told her, "Justice is balance, not noise." He had whispered that to her before her first ruling, standing just off chambers, smiling with a kind of paternal pride. She had believed him. She had built an entire professional identity around the kind of deliberate, quiet power he embodied. And yet, here it was. Benedict hadn't just known about Ryder's misconduct, he had helped bury it. Again and again. Not because the evidence was lacking, but because, as one memo read, public trust must outweigh public reaction. The phrase repeated in her head like a ticking clock. Public trust. Public trust. As though silence preserved order. As though the truth would crumble what power had built. The betrayal hit her in layers. First, as a colleague. Then, as a woman who had once walked into a courthouse and been treated like she didn't belong. Then finally, as a judge who now realized the system she defended wasn't broken. It had been constructed this way on purpose. That same afternoon, Stallone arrived at her chambers without ceremony, his face drawn tighter than usual, his voice low. "I need to show you something," he said, and held out his phone. It was an audio file, 34 seconds long, muffled at first, the sound of office chairs shifting, distant typing, and then a voice, gravelly, commanding, unmistakable. Benedict. Ryder's methods might be rough, but he keeps order, especially with certain groups. We need men like that in places where control matters. There was a pause in the recording, a shuffling of feet, then a second voice, smaller, hesitant. "But Judge, the complaints, we don't have the luxury of optics," Benedict snapped. "What matters is peace, not politics." Stallone paused the clip. It was recorded 2 years ago. One of the file clerks had the sense to save it. Michelle didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her silence was no longer quiet. It was poised, pressurized. That evening, inside courtroom 5A, with the press seated like vultures and the gallery full of breathless tension, Michelle stepped onto the bench without her robe on. Not at first. She carried it folded in her arm, like a statement yet to be made. When the court clerk called the session to order, she walked slowly to the center of the bench, turned to face the courtroom, and laid the envelope on the stand. Then she played the recording. No preamble, no context, just the raw sound of the system indicting itself. When it ended, the silence that followed wasn't shock. It was confirmation. Everyone had suspected. Now they knew. She placed the paper files on the table, stacked neatly, one atop the other. "I am submitting this into the official record," she said, her voice steady. "These are internal communications, judicial signatures, and audio evidence confirming a pattern of deliberate suppression of misconduct reports, spanning over a decade." She didn't need to name Benedict. His name had already echoed in every mind in the room. By the end of the day, 3 judges, 2 assistant district attorneys, and 1 chief of staff had resigned, each citing personal reasons, each walking out under a different kind of silence than the one they had imposed for years. And as Michelle finally slipped her robe over her shoulders, the gallery didn't clap. But they did rise, not out of habit, but because something in the room had shifted. The weight of power had moved, and this time, it was falling in the right direction. The soundstage smelled like fresh paint and sawdust. Spotlights hung like silent watchers from the rafters, and someone, somewhere behind a curtain, was hammering down tape to mark an actor's mark. Michelle hadn't stepped onto a film set in over 20 years, not since her husband's brief stint as a local consultant on a courtroom drama that never aired. And now, here she was, not as a spectator, not as a fan, but as the heartbeat behind the script. Stallone greeted her at the door with a quiet nod. No cameras, no entourage, just a man who knew this wasn't a moment for showmanship. "This way," he said, motioning her past a crew member rolling a dolly track. She followed him into a reconstructed courtroom, the bench nearly identical to the one she'd stood behind weeks earlier. The flags, the seal, even the scuff marks along the wooden panels. It felt like walking into a memory, one she hadn't asked to relive. A group of actors stood to the side, murmuring lines, sipping coffee, adjusting cuffs. When Stallone spoke her name, they turned. One by one, their expressions shifted. First recognition, then awe, then a kind of reverence reserved for people who've walked through fire and still stand tall. The actress playing Michelle stepped forward. Late 30s, tightly wound curls, eyes wide with something between nerves and admiration. "I didn't think you'd actually come," she said. Michelle offered a small smile. "Neither did I." The woman hesitated, then added, "I've been studying you. The footage, the hearings, every interview. But there's something I can't get right." "What's that?" Her voice dropped. "How to show pain without letting it shake the authority. How to let people see you're hurt, but still make them stand when you enter the room." Michelle looked at her for a long moment, then took a slow breath. "That's not acting," she said gently. "That's surviving." The actress's lips parted, but no words came. Just a small, reverent nod. In the far corner, the actor playing Ryder watched with quiet discomfort. He bore only a passing resemblance, but it was enough to make Michelle's shoulders tighten. She didn't greet him. She didn't need to. Some characters didn't deserve redemption. Not in real life. Across the room, another actor, taller, grayer, rehearsed a line in a tone too soft, too careful. Stallone leaned in. "That's Benedict," he said. "He's struggling with the voice. Keeps saying it's hard to play someone so respected who did so much harm." Michelle's gaze didn't move. "It should be hard." They walked outside after that. Stallone led her toward a modest press tent just beyond the trailers, flanked by microphones and a dozen folding chairs. He took the podium without notes. "I've played a lot of fighters," he began. "Boxers, soldiers, survivors, but none of them had the courage of the woman standing behind me." He gestured to Michelle, but didn't make her step forward. She didn't ask for the spotlight. She didn't go looking for a stage. But when injustice found her, she didn't shrink. She stood. And because she stood, we're telling this story, not to entertain, but to remember, to change. Reporters raised their hands, but Stallone continued, steady and firm. "We're donating 100% of this film's profits to the Justice Survivors Fund, and we fully endorse the Monroe Mandate, not just in words, but in action. We're pushing for it to be adopted in every federal district that'll listen." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone clapped, then another. It grew, like a wave cresting, quiet, but undeniable. Back inside the studio, the production manager approached Michelle with a clipboard. "Ma'am, just so you're aware, the film's already been fast-tracked. After the footage went viral and the press conference with the DOJ, the network started calling. It hasn't even finished shooting, but they want to release it this fall. Limited theatrical, then streaming. They're calling it a social reckoning piece." Michelle didn't respond at first. She watched as the lights shifted for the next scene, as an extra adjusted the replica judge's robe on the coat rack, as a camera moved silently into position. "Let them call it what they want," she said, voice low. "Just make sure they tell the truth." Behind her, the actress who played her stepped onto the set, spine straight, breath steady. And for a moment, it was like looking into a mirror, not of the face, but of the fight. The courtroom was quiet when the doors opened again that morning. Not silent, but quiet in the way a church is before the sermon begins. Rows of benches filled with people, some with notes folded in trembling hands, others with memories they hadn't spoken aloud in years. The air was heavy, not tense, just full, like a dam waiting. Judge Michelle Monroe sat at the bench, robe draped over her shoulders like a shield. Her hands were clasped together, resting on the desk, but her eyes were already scanning the room, reading the weight each person carried before a word was said. The first to stand was a man in his 60s, salt and pepper beard, knuckles scarred from factory work. He cleared his throat once, voice raw with age and something older than that, betrayal.
"Ryder threw me against a wall in 2009, he said. "My daughter had come to file a restraining order. I raised my voice. That's all, just raised it. Next thing I know, I'm on the floor. 2 broken ribs, and when I filed the complaint, they said I slipped. That I imagined it." No one interrupted. Not the lawyers. Not the clerk. Not even the bailiff standing at the far wall who used to call Ryder a friend. The next was a woman. Then another. Then a young man whose voice cracked as he spoke. One by one they stood, stories tumbling into the air, no longer afraid to touch it. He said I was too emotional. He laughed while I cried. He told me I should have known better than to come in dressed like that. They weren't all violent assaults. Some were verbal wounds that had never healed. Some were stares, silences, threats too subtle for a camera but sharp enough to leave a scar. But they all pointed to the same man, the same system, the same rot hiding in polished corridors. Then Daisy stood. She was older now. Her spine curved slightly, like a paper that had been folded too many times, but her voice didn't shake. She wore a simple blue sweater and glasses that caught the courtroom light. When she walked to the witness stand, the murmurs died. "I worked in the records office," she began. "For almost 25 years. I've seen more paperwork than most of you will in a lifetime. And I can tell you this, I filed the complaints. I saw them. I stamped them. I walked them to the review desk." She looked down at her hands, then back at the judge. But someone else made them disappear. A hush fell so thick it felt like breath was being held in every corner of the room. "Benedict," she said plainly, and his supervisor before him. They said, "We don't want waves. We want order." So they filed them under miscellaneous and locked them in a drawer. Judge Monroe didn't move, but something in her face, her stillness, was louder than any gavel. Daisy's voice cracked for the first time. "It's not that we didn't speak," she said. "It's that no one listened." Gasps rippled, and then silence again. A silence that felt like grief, like shame, like recognition. Michelle stood slowly. Her voice was low, but steady, like a river that had worn down mountains. "We will no longer be silent to preserve a lie called peace," she said. "This courtroom is not a museum of order. It is a forge. And today, we fire truth into iron." She lifted a folder. The seal was broken. Inside was the policy she had been working on for weeks, alone, long after the halls emptied and the city lights dimmed. The Monroe Mandate is no longer a proposal. As of today, it is law, here,
in this courthouse. Mandatory anti-bias training, psychological evaluations, oversight without exception.
And every one of your voices, she said, turning to the crowd, will be archived, protected, and believed. There was no applause, only the sound of one person standing, then another, and another. Not a protest, not a celebration, just people rising, quietly, as if to say, we are still here. Outside, hundreds had gathered. They lined the steps, the sidewalks, the streets. They didn't chant, they didn't shout, they just held signs. I see her, I hear her, I believe her. Some held them high. Others just placed them gently against the courthouse walls. No music, no cameras, just presence. Inside, Daisy walked back to her seat, eyes wet but proud. Michelle watched her go, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't have to, because sometimes the most powerful sound in a courtroom is the one that was buried for years, finally rising. The courtroom was hushed, not by formality but by something deeper, reverence, maybe, or reckoning. Michelle sat straight in her chair, robe draped over her shoulders like a weight she no longer feared. She looked out across the rows of benches where reporters, victims, skeptics, and silent believers sat shoulder to shoulder. No one fidgeted. No one whispered. Even the air seemed to hold still, waiting for her to speak. She picked up the folder in front of her, slim, final, the Ryder case file. Her fingers lingered for a second longer than they needed to, not because she doubted the verdict, but because she understood what it meant to speak it aloud. The court finds Deputy Alan Ryder guilty, she said, each word firm, deliberate, of abuse of power, of violation of civil rights, of obstruction of justice. She paused, and in the pause, the room seemed to exhale and hold its breath all over again. For these crimes, Mr. Ryder is hereby sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Not a sound followed, not applause, not gasps, just stillness, thick and sacred. But she wasn't finished. Michelle rose. She did not look at Ryder, seated off to the side, hands cuffed, head lowered. She looked instead into the gallery, into the quiet, into the truth. This system, she said, her voice steady but laced with steel, was not corrupted by one man alone. This system failed not because of Ryder, but because so many chose to look away, chose silence, chose convenience over conscience. Her eyes swept the room, and for too long, justice has been defined by titles, by robes, by uniforms. But justice is not a costume. It is a commitment, and it's time we remember that. She tapped the gavel, just once. Sentence is final. As Ryder was led away, no one clapped, but no one turned their eyes either. They watched him go, not with joy, not with revenge, but with the kind of weight that came from finally seeing something named for what it was. And then... The film opened 3 weeks later, not with a red carpet, not with flashing lights, just a quiet theater in D.C., the first public screening of The Weight of Her Robe, written, produced, and narrated by Sylvester Stallone. People expected drama. What they got was truth. The film didn't dramatize Michelle's story, it documented it. Grainy security footage, audio recordings, testimonies from the stand. Even the clip of her walking into the courtroom with a jagged scalp and unbroken spine made it in, uncut, unfiltered. The final frame was a still image of Michelle, seated behind the bench, her eyes locked on the camera, unblinking. Underneath it read one line, based on what truly happened. That was her only request. No payment, no percentage, just that one sentence. Within months, the ripple grew. One by one, states began introducing versions of the Monroe Mandate, anti-bias protocols, accountability boards, whistleblower protections. Courthouse walls that once silenced were now being audited, reviewed, rewritten. Not all at once, not without pushback. But something had shifted. The room, as she once said, felt different.
It didn't feel safer. It felt watched. And maybe that was a start. A few months after the film's release, in a high school history class just outside Indianapolis, a young girl raised her hand during a lesson on judicial reform. "Does justice have a face?" she asked. The teacher paused, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she wanted to choose the right one. She walked to the front of the room, reached for a laminated photo taped beside the whiteboard, a black and white image of a woman seated at a federal bench, her head shaved clean, her eyes calm, unflinching. She held the photo up for the class to see. "Yes," the teacher said quietly. "It does." She turned the photo around. And sometimes justice walks into a courtroom with no hair, no fanfare, and no intention of bowing. No one spoke. But something lingered in the silence. Not awe, not confusion. Recognition. They knew her. That night, Michelle stood at her kitchen window, a kettle humming behind her, steam curling in the air like a memory she hadn't yet spoken aloud. Outside, the trees moved gently. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. She wasn't looking for peace. She didn't need it, because she had something more useful now. A face that couldn't be unseen, and a silence that no longer belonged to anyone else. And that's where we leave it. A courtroom no longer echoing with silence, a woman who refused to bow, and a system, finally, forced to look itself in the mirror. Michelle didn't just deliver justice, she became it. Not because she was flawless, but because she stood her ground when every reason told her not to. And somewhere in the back row of that courtroom, there was a man named Sylvester Stallone. He didn't plan to change the story. He just hit record when it mattered most. His camera didn't just capture a moment, it helped spark a movement. And maybe that's the quiet power of witnessing. So if you're still here, listening, thank you. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's next. And if you believe in stories that don't flinch, don't look away, and don't back down, share this one. Until next time, stay strong, stay grounded, and stay human. All stories on this channel are fictional and for entertainment only. We believe in equal rights for all, and aim to share messages of kindness, fairness, and dignity. Any similarities to real people or events are purely coincidental. These stories are free of political or religious intent and are designed to inspire, not to reflect or represent real-world entities.